The medical facility on Harmony Point was quiet except for the soft hum of air recyclers. Commander Zekthar sat in the white chair, his forearms resting uncomfortably on the armrests. His blue skin had turned a dull gray color over the past year. The doctors said it was from stress, but Zekthar knew better. It was from the memories. Across from him, a young reporter from the Galactic Broadcasting Network adjusted her recording equipment. Her name was Lyra Voss, and she belonged to the Centauri species. Her large eyes showed both excitement and nervousness. This was the biggest story of her career. "Commander Zekthar," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. I know this is difficult for you." Zekthar's mandibles clicked together slowly. It was a nervous habit he had developed since the war ended. The sound echoed in the small room like tiny bones breaking. "Difficult," he repeated, his voice rough from months of silence. "That is one word for it." Lyra checked her recording device one more time. The red light blinked, showing it was working. "Our viewers want to understand what happened during the Third Galactic War. Specifically, they want to know about the humans." At the mention of humans, Zekthar's secondary arms twitched. His doctor had warned him this might happen. Post-traumatic stress, they called it. But no Vorthak in history had ever experienced anything like what Zekthar and his soldiers had gone through. "The humans," Zekthar said quietly. "Everyone wants to know about the humans." He looked out the window at the stars beyond. Harmony Point was a neutral station, built after the war ended. It was supposed to be a place of peace where different species could meet safely, but Zekthar didn't feel safe anywhere anymore, not since he learned what humans were really capable of. "Commander, you served in 6 different conflict zones against human forces. You were decorated for bravery 5 times. Your military record shows you were one of the finest officers in the Vorthak fleet." "Was," Zekthar corrected. "I was a fine officer, before I met them." Lyra leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell us about your first encounter with human forces?" Zekthar was quiet for a long moment. His main arms gripped the chair tightly enough that his claws left small marks in the material. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We thought we knew about warfare. The Vorthak have been fighting for over 2,000 years. We had rules, conventions, ways that civilized species conducted war." He paused, clicking his mandibles again. "The humans taught us that we knew nothing." The reporter waited patiently. She had been told that Zekthar might need time between questions. The medical staff had explained that he was one of only 12 Vorthak veterans who had agreed to speak about their experiences. The others were either dead, missing, or had lost their minds completely. "I commanded the 47th Assault Regiment," Zekthar continued. "We were considered elite troops, the best of the best. We had never lost a battle, never retreated. We were proud warriors." His voice grew stronger as he talked about the old days before the humans, before everything changed. "When the war started, we were excited. The humans were new to space travel. They had only been off their planet for about 200 years. Their technology was primitive compared to ours. Their ships were smaller, their weapons weaker. Intelligence reports said they had no real military tradition." Zekthar laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was bitter and cold. "Intelligence reports," he repeated. "We believed everything our analysts told us. The humans were soft. They came from an easy world. They had never faced real hardship. They would surrender quickly when faced with superior force." Lyra made notes on her tablet as he spoke. "What changed your mind?" "The first battle. Planet designation Kepler 442b. A mining colony with maybe 50,000 humans, mostly civilians. A few security guards with basic training. We brought 10,000 elite troops." He stopped talking and stared at his hands. His claws had grown longer since the war ended. Another stress response, the doctor said. His body was preparing for fights that would never come. "We expected them to surrender when they saw our ships. Standard procedure was to demand surrender. Give them time to consider, then accept their terms, clean, professional. The way war should be conducted." "But they didn't surrender?" "Oh, they responded to our demand," Zekthar said. Their leader, a woman named Sarah Chen, got on the communication channel. She was maybe 40 years old, average height for a human. She looked tired, like she had been working long hours in the mines. Lyra waited for him to continue. She said, and I remember her exact words, "We reject your demand for surrender. We will fight you with everything we have. We will not make this easy for you." Zekthar's voice grew quieter. Then she said something else, something that should have warned us. What did she say? She said, "You have no idea what you're walking into." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Zekthar seemed lost in the memory, his eyes unfocused. "We laughed," he admitted. "My officers and I, we actually laughed. What could 50,000 miners do against 10,000 trained soldiers? We had orbital support, heavy weapons, powered armor. They had mining equipment and hunting rifles." He looked directly at Lyra for the first time since the interview began. We stopped laughing very quickly. The reporter checked her notes. "What happened when you landed?" "That comes next," Zekthar said. "But first you need to understand something about humans. Something we didn't learn until it was too late." "What's that?" "They don't think like other species. When most civilized races face impossible odds, they look for ways to minimize casualties. They negotiate. They find compromises. They surrender when continuing to fight would be pointless." Zekthar's mandibles clicked rapidly now, like an old machine struggling to work. Humans are different. When they face impossible odds, they don't think about minimizing casualties. They think about maximizing damage to their enemy. They don't look for ways to survive. They look for ways to make sure you suffer before they die. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "Commander, are you saying that humans prefer to die fighting rather than surrender?" "I'm saying that humans don't see death as the worst thing that can happen to them. They see defeat as worse than death. They see dishonor as worse than death. They see their families enslaved as worse than death." He stood up suddenly, moving to the window. His reflection showed in the glass and he looked older than his years. "But even that isn't the worst part," he said, not turning around. "What's the worst part?" "The worst part is that they're very, very good at making sure they don't die alone." The interview room fell silent again. Outside the window, ships from a dozen different species moved through space, carrying trade goods and passengers in peaceful commerce. It was a beautiful sight, but Zekthar barely saw it. "Commander," Lyra said gently, "are you ready to tell us about that first battle?" Zekthar nodded slowly, returning to his chair. "Yes," he said. "It's time you knew the truth about what humans become when they decide to fight." Zekthar stared at the recording device for several seconds before beginning. The red light blinked steadily, waiting to capture his words. He knew that once he started talking about Kepler 442b, there would be no going back. The memories would flood out like water through a broken dam. "The landing was perfect," he began. "Textbook military operation. We came down in drop pods at dawn when the humans would be tired and confused. Our forces surrounded the main mining complex within 30 minutes. We had them completely cut off from any escape routes." He paused, remembering how confident they had all felt in those first moments. The human settlement was built around 3 large mining facilities, about 2,000 buildings total, mostly housing units and workshops. Our sensors showed approximately 50,000 life signs. Standard procedure was to set up a perimeter, then demand surrender over loudspeakers. Lyra took notes as he spoke. "Did the humans respond to your demands?" "Oh, they responded," Zekthar said, his mandibles clicking once. "But not the way we expected. Instead of a surrender message, we started hearing sounds from inside the settlement. Banging, hammering, the sound of metal being worked. The commander's secondary arms began to twitch, slightly as he continued the story. My lieutenant, Thexfor, monitored their communications. The humans weren't discussing surrender terms or evacuation plans. They were coordinating work assignments, moving equipment, building something. Building what? We didn't know at the time. Our orders were to wait 6 hours for surrender, then begin the assault if they refused. Standard siege protocols. We set up our heavy weapons and waited." Zekthar stood up and moved to the window again. Looking at the peaceful stars seemed to help him tell the story. During those 6 hours, the sounds from the settlement never stopped. Hammering, welding, machinery running. Our reconnaissance drones showed humans moving constantly between buildings. They looked busy but not panicked. It was strange. Strange how? In every other battle we had fought, civilians would be running around in fear when they saw our ships. They would be crying, praying, trying to hide. These humans were working, calmly, efficiently, like they had been preparing for this day their whole lives. The commander returned to his chair, gripping the armrest with his main hands. When the 6 hours ended, we moved in. The plan was simple. The 1st Battalion would take the north entrance, 2nd Battalion the south, 3rd Battalion the east. I would lead the command unit through the main gate to the west. Quick, clean, minimal casualties on both sides. His voice grew quieter as he reached the difficult part of the memory. The first sign that something was wrong came from the 1st Battalion. Major Kethron reported that the north entrance had been blocked. Not just blocked, completely sealed with metal plates. The humans had spent those 6 hours turning their settlement into a fortress. Lyra looked up from her notes. But surely your weapons could break through some metal plates. That's what we thought. Our plasma cutters went through the barriers easily enough. But when the 1st Battalion entered the settlement, they found something none of us had expected. Zekthar's hands began to shake slightly. Even a year later, the memory still affected him physically. The humans were waiting, all of them. Every single civilian had armed themselves with something. Mining tools, kitchen knives, broken metal pipes, hunting rifles. But that wasn't the shocking part. What was the shocking part? They had organized themselves into military units. Somehow, in just 6 hours, 50,000 miners and shopkeepers had turned themselves into an army. They had established defensive positions, created supply lines, set up medical stations. It was impossible. The commander paused to collect himself. The medical staff had given him medication to help with the stress responses, but the memories were stronger than any drug. The fighting started immediately. Our soldiers were better trained, better armed, better armored. We should have won quickly, and at first it seemed like we were winning. What do you mean it seemed like you were winning? We shot them and they fell down. Our weapons work exactly as designed. A plasma burst to the chest will drop any organic life form. We moved through the settlement, engaging targets, watching them fall. By noon, we had eliminated over 300 human combatants. Zekthar's voice became very quiet. Then, something happened that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. He was silent for almost a full minute. Lyra waited patiently, sensing that this was the crucial moment in his story. The humans we had shot started getting back up. I'm sorry. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. The humans we had killed earlier in the day stood up and started fighting again. We watched it happen. A human male, maybe 30 years old, had taken a direct plasma hit to the chest. We saw him fall. We confirmed he was dead. No pulse, no breathing, massive tissue damage. Zekthar's mandibles clicked rapidly now. 4 hours later, that same human walked around a corner and shot 2 of my soldiers. He was still badly wounded. There was a hole in his chest you could put your fist through, but he was alive and fighting. Lyra stared at him. Commander, that's impossible. No organic life form can survive that kind of damage. That's what we thought too, so we started paying closer attention. What we discovered was that the humans had medical teams moving through the battlefield during the fighting. They would find their wounded and dead, inject them with something, and send them back into combat. The commander stood up again, pacing now. We captured one of these medical teams. Under interrogation, they told us about combat stimulants. Drugs that could keep a human body functioning even with fatal injuries. The human nervous system could be artificially maintained for hours after clinical death. That sounds like torture. We thought so too, but the humans didn't see it that way. To them, it was just another tool of war. They would take soldiers who were dying and turn them into weapons that felt no pain, no fear, no hesitation. Zekthar returned to his chair, but remained on the edge, ready to move again. By evening, we realized we weren't fighting 50,000 humans. We were fighting 50,000 humans plus every human we had killed during the day. Our casualties were mounting, but their numbers never seemed to decrease. How did the battle end? It didn't end. Not really. We held the settlement for 3 days. Every hour, more humans would appear from somewhere. Wounded ones walking around with injuries that should have been fatal. Dead ones being carried by their friends, then suddenly joining the fight again. The commander's voice became very soft. On the 3rd day, I made the decision to withdraw. We had started with 10,000 elite troops. We had maybe 4,000 left who were still combat effective. The humans had taken massive casualties, but they kept fighting. Did your superiors support your decision to withdraw? They didn't understand it at first. How could elite Vorthak troops fail to defeat a bunch of miners? So I sent them the video recordings. Zekthar looked directly at Lyra. I sent them footage of a human female, maybe 60 years old, who had been shot through the head. Half her skull was missing. She should have been dead instantly, but she kept fighting for another 2 hours, using a mining drill to kill 3 of my soldiers before her body finally stopped functioning. The room fell silent. Lyra realized she had stopped taking notes and was just staring at the commander. After reviewing the footage, my superiors classified the humans as a special threat category. New protocols were developed for fighting them. But by then, word had spread to other human colonies. What do you mean? I mean that the humans on Kepler 442b had been in communication with other human settlements throughout the battle. They were sharing information, tactics, medical procedures. Every human colony in space learned about combat stimulants and resurrection protocols within days. Zekthar stood up one final time. We had taught them how to fight us by fighting them. And they had taught each other. From that point forward, every battle against humans became a battle against an enemy that refused to stay dead. Commander, you mentioned that this was just the first battle. It got worse? Zekthar's mandibles clicked one last time before he answered. Much worse. Because the humans had learned something about us too. What had they learned? They learned that we could be broken. The medical facility's lights dimmed automatically as evening approached on Harmony Point. Zekthar noticed the change immediately, his body tensing. Even a year after the war ended, darkness still brought unwelcome memories. Commander, Lyra said softly, would you prefer to continue this tomorrow? I can see the lighting is bothering you. No, Zekthar replied firmly. If I stop now, I might not be able to start again. And you need to hear about New Geneva. He adjusted his position in the chair, trying to find comfort that wouldn't come. The doctors had explained that his nervous system was permanently changed by what he had experienced. Hypervigilance, they called it. His body would never fully relax again. New Geneva was different from Kepler 442b, he began. It was an established human colony, about 500,000 people. They had been there for over 50 years. It was their capital world in the Centauri sector. Lyra looked up from her notes. A much larger target, exactly. High Command decided that if we were going to defeat the humans, we needed to take one of their major worlds, show them that their resurrection tricks wouldn't work against a full military assault. Zekthar's secondary arms began their familiar twitching as he continued. We brought the entire Fifth Fleet, 60 ships, 300,000 troops, the largest military operation in Vorthak history. We were going to end the human resistance in one decisive battle. What was different about the approach this time? Everything. We had learned from Kepler 442b. No more warnings, no more time to prepare. We would strike fast and hard, orbital bombardment followed by immediate ground assault. Complete the operation in hours, not days. The commander paused, looking out at the darkening space beyond the window. The orbital bombardment went perfectly. We destroyed their spaceport, their power grid, their communication centers. Their major military installations were reduced to crater fields. By every measure, we had crippled their ability to resist. But the humans had learned from Kepler 442b too. They knew we were coming. Somehow, they always knew we were coming. Zekthar stood up and moved away from the window as the lights outside grew brighter. The contrast made the room seem darker, and he didn't like darkness anymore. When our ground forces landed, New Geneva looked like a dead city. No power, no communications, minimal life signs on our sensors. We thought the bombardment had been more effective than expected. Were you right? In a way. Most of the humans had evacuated the surface levels and moved underground. New Geneva had extensive mining tunnels and subway systems. The bombardment hadn't touched them. The commander's voice grew quieter as he reached the difficult part of the story. What we didn't know was that they had been planning for our arrival for weeks. Every tunnel, every basement, every sewer pipe had been turned into a defensive position. But that wasn't the worst part. What was the worst part? They had been studying us, learning about our psychology, our fears, our social structures. Somehow they had gotten detailed information about Vorthak culture and military organization. Lyra frowned. How could they know about your culture? Humans had barely made contact with your species before the war started. That's what we wondered too. But as the siege continued, it became clear that they knew things about us that even our own intelligence services didn't know. Zekthar returned to his chair but didn't sit down. He stood behind it, gripping the back with all four arms. The first incident happened on day 3 of the siege. Private Keshtel was on guard duty at the perimeter. It was his first deployment, young soldier, very nervous about combat. What happened to him? He reported hearing his mother's voice calling to him from the ruins of a building. In perfect Vorthak, using his childhood nickname that only family members knew. When he investigated, he found nothing. The commander's mandibles clicked slowly, rhythmically. We assumed it was stress. Combat can make soldiers imagine things. But then it happened again. And again. Different soldiers, different voices, but always someone from home calling them by names that humans shouldn't have known. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. How were the humans getting this information? We never found out. But the psychological effect was devastating. Our soldiers stopped trusting their own senses. Every sound could be a trap. Every familiar voice could be an enemy trick. Zekthar began pacing behind his chair, unable to stay still. It got worse. The humans started leaving messages for specific soldiers. Personal messages. They would carve them into walls or arrange objects in patterns that our troops would find during patrols. What kind of messages? Details about soldiers' families back home. Their wives' names, their children's birthdays, their parents' health problems. Information that should have been impossible for the humans to obtain. The room seemed to grow colder as Zekthar continued his story. Sergeant Vexmore found a message carved into a tunnel wall. It said his daughter had failed her schooling exams and was crying herself to sleep every night. The message was in Vorthak script, perfect grammar. Even used the correct formal address for a military father. Was the information accurate? We checked. Every single personal detail the humans included in their messages was completely accurate. Somehow they had real-time intelligence about our soldiers' families. Zekthar stopped pacing and looked directly at Lyra. Do you understand what that meant for morale? Our soldiers began to believe that the humans could see everything, know everything. They felt exposed, vulnerable, like there was nowhere to hide. How did the humans get this information? That was the question that kept me awake every night. We had secure communications with the homeworlds. Our intelligence services assured us that no human spies had infiltrated Vorthak space. Yet somehow they knew intimate details about our soldiers' personal lives. The commander sat down heavily in his chair. The psychological warfare escalated. The humans started taking our dead. Taking them. Our soldiers who died in combat would disappear. We would find their bodies gone from where they fell. At first, we thought they were just removing evidence or preventing us from recovering our fallen. Zekthar's voice became very quiet. Then we started finding them arranged in patterns. What kind of patterns? Geometric shapes. Our dead soldiers positioned in perfect circles, triangles, spirals. Always in places where our patrols would find them. Always arranged with mathematical precision. The commander's hands began to shake as he described the scene. But it wasn't random. The patterns meant something. Our cryptographers worked around the clock trying to decode them. What they discovered was worse than random violence. What did they discover? The patterns were messages. The humans were using our dead as a communication system. The position of each body, the orientation, the spacing, it all corresponded to Vorthak mathematical concepts. Lyra stopped taking notes and stared at him. Commander, are you saying the humans were fluent in Vorthak mathematics? I'm saying the humans understood our mathematics better than most Vorthak do. The messages they created using our dead were complex theoretical equations. Proofs of advanced concepts that only our top scientists should have been able to comprehend. Zekthar stood up again, unable to remain seated. The final message was the worst. They arranged 37 of our soldiers in a pattern that, when viewed from above, represented the complete solution to Thekfor's theorem. What's Thekfor's theorem? An unsolved mathematical problem that our greatest minds had been working on for over 200 years. The humans solved it in a single night using our dead as symbols. The room fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Lyra realized she was holding her breath. That's when I understood what the humans were really doing, Zekthar continued. This wasn't just psychological warfare. It was a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Intelligence. The humans were showing us that they were smarter than us, that they could understand our culture, our mathematics, our psychology better than we understood it ourselves. Zekthar moved to the window one more time, but turned away quickly as the darkness outside seemed to press against the glass. The siege of New Geneva lasted 43 days. We never took the city. Eventually, High Command ordered a withdrawal. Why did they order a withdrawal if you had such superior numbers? Because half our soldiers were having nervous breakdowns. They were afraid to go on patrol alone. Afraid to sleep. Afraid of voices in the dark that knew their names. The commander's voice became very soft. The humans had weaponized fear itself. They had turned our own minds against us. What happened to the human civilians during all this? Zekthar was quiet for a long moment before answering. That's the truly terrifying part. We never found any human bodies, none. Despite weeks of fighting, despite heavy casualties on both sides, we never recovered a single human corpse. Where were they? We don't know. It was like they were fighting ghosts. Voices in the dark that knew everything about us but left no trace of themselves. The lights in the room brightened automatically as full night fell outside. Zekthar relaxed slightly in the artificial illumination. After New Geneva, everything changed. The humans had shown us that they could break our minds as easily as they could break our bodies. And that was just the beginning. There was more? Oh yes, Zekthar said, his mandibles clicking one final time. The worst was yet to come. Zekthar requested a break before continuing his story. The medical staff brought him water and checked his vital signs. His stress levels were elevated but manageable. After 20 minutes, he indicated he was ready to continue. Firebase Omega, he said as soon as Lyra reactivated the recording device. That's where everything went wrong. Where I learned what humans become when they stop pretending to be civilized. The commander's posture was different now, more rigid, more alert, like a soldier preparing for battle. Firebase Omega was a strategic position on the planet Tau Ceti Prime. The humans had established a research facility there, studying some kind of alien artifacts they had discovered. High Command wanted those artifacts. What made this battle different from the others? The prisoners, Zekthar said simply. Everything changed because of what happened to the prisoners. He paused, gathering himself for what was clearly a difficult memory. The assault on Firebase Omega went better than expected initially. We overwhelmed their outer defenses within 6 hours. Captured the main facility by day 2. We took about 200 human prisoners, mostly researchers and technicians. Lyra noted the change in his tone, more clinical, more detached, like he was reading from a military report. Standard procedure was to process prisoners according to the Galactic Warfare Convention. Identification, medical treatment, secure holding until prisoner exchange could be arranged. That sounds reasonable. It was reasonable. It was civilized. It was how warfare was supposed to be conducted between intelligent species. Zekthar's mandibles clicked once, sharply, but Colonel Theckamar had different ideas. He was young, ambitious, wanted to advance his career quickly. He decided that human prisoners were too dangerous to keep alive. The room seemed to grow colder as Zekthar continued. On day 3, while I was coordinating our defensive positions around the firebase, Colonel Theckamar ordered the execution of all human prisoners. Lyra looked up from her notes, shocked. That's a war crime under Galactic Convention. Yes, it is. I tried to stop him when I found out, but it was too late. 200 human researchers and technicians, shot in the back of the head and buried in mass graves. Zekthar stood up and began pacing again. We thought that would be the end of it. A terrible decision by an ambitious colonel, but militarily insignificant. The firebase was secure, the artifacts were ours, the humans had no way to mount a counterattack. But they did counterattack, not immediately. For 3 days everything was quiet. No human activity in the area. No communication intercepts. No movement on our sensors. We started to think they had given up. The commander's voice grew quieter. Then on day 6 we intercepted a human communication broadcast. It was transmitted on all frequencies, sent to every human colony and ship in the sector. What did it say? It was a message from the human colony administrator, a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Shaw. She had been in charge of the research facility. She listed the names of all 200 prisoners who had been executed. She read them out loud, one by one, with their ages and family details. Zekthar stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. Then she said something that chilled my blood. She said, "The Galactic Warfare Convention no longer applies to this conflict. Omega Protocol is now in effect." What's Omega Protocol? We didn't know at the time. The human military codes were still mostly mystery to us, but we learned very quickly what it meant. The commander sat down heavily. It meant that all rules of civilized warfare were suspended. It meant that humans would no longer limit themselves to military targets or conventional tactics. It meant that they considered us to be beyond the protection of any law or treaty. How did this change their behavior? The first sign came 12 hours after the broadcast. A human transport ship appeared at the edge of the system. Single vessel, no escort, broadcasting a message that they wanted to negotiate for the return of their prisoners. Zekthar's hands began to shake slightly. Of course, we couldn't return prisoners who were already dead. Colonel Theckamar decided to lie. He told them the prisoners were alive and well, and invited the transport to land for negotiations. Did the humans believe him? They sent down a single shuttle with a diplomatic team. 3 humans, all unarmed, carrying a white flag of truce. They walked right into our firebase like they had no fear at all. The commander's voice became very quiet. The lead negotiator was a human male, maybe 50 years old. He introduced himself as Captain James Rodriguez. He asked to see the prisoners to verify their condition before beginning negotiations. What did Colonel Tekmar do? He panicked. Instead of admitting what he had done, he decided to double down on the lie. He told Captain Rodriguez that the prisoners were being held in a secure facility and couldn't be visited for security reasons. Zekthar looked directly at Lyra. Captain Rodriguez nodded politely, said he understood, and then did something that should have been impossible. What did he do? He recited the exact location of the mass graves where we had buried the prisoners. Not just the general area, the precise coordinates down to the meter. He knew exactly where everybody was buried. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Then Captain Rodriguez said something I'll never forget. He said, "Colonel Tekmar, you have murdered 200 unarmed researchers in violation of every law of civilized warfare. The Omega Protocol is now confirmed. You have 48 hours to evacuate this planet before we implement full sanctions." What did he mean by full sanctions? We found out soon enough. The diplomatic team returned to their shuttle and left the planet. Colonel Tekmar was furious, called them cowards for making empty threats. Zekthar stood up again, unable to remain seated. 48 hours later, they came back. But this time, it wasn't a diplomatic mission. How many ships did they bring? Just one. The same transport from before. But when it landed, what came out wasn't a diplomatic team. The commander's voice became very soft, almost a whisper. They were still humans. Same species, same basic physiology. But they were different, changed somehow. Changed how? Their eyes were different. No fear, no hesitation, no mercy. They moved like predators. Like they had been designed specifically for killing. Zekthar began pacing again, faster this time. They didn't use the main entrance to the firebase. They didn't use vehicles or heavy weapons. 24 humans, armed only with bladed weapons and personal firearms, walked straight through our outer perimeter. How did they get through your defenses? They didn't get through them. They went through them. Literally. When our automated gun turrets opened fire, they just kept walking, taking hits, bleeding, but not slowing down. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly now. Sergeant Kexivor was in the first defensive line. He reported that he put 6 plasma bolts into a human female who was charging his position with nothing but a knife. She absorbed every hit, kept coming, and killed him with her bare hands. That doesn't sound physically possible. Nothing about that day was physically possible. The humans had done something to themselves. Enhanced their bodies somehow. They felt no pain, showed no fear, and refused to stop fighting until they were physically destroyed. Zekthar stopped pacing and gripped his chair again. But the worst part wasn't their physical capabilities. It was their behavior. What do you mean? They were laughing. As they killed my soldiers, as they took damage that should have been fatal, they were laughing. Not with joy or excitement. With a cold, terrible satisfaction. The commander's voice broke slightly. I watched a human male, gut shot and bleeding out, strangle 3 of my soldiers while laughing like it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. He kept laughing even as he died. The room seemed to grow colder as Zekthar continued. The entire firebase fell in 4 hours. 1,500 elite Vorthak troops killed by 24 humans with knives and small arms. It was militarily impossible, but it happened. How did you survive? I was in the command bunker when it started. Reinforced walls, multiple defensive lines between me and the attackers. I thought I was safe. Zekthar's hands were shaking visibly now. A human female broke through the final defensive line. She had been shot over 30 times. Half her face was missing from a plasma blast, but she was still fighting, still laughing. What happened? She looked right at me and said, "You killed our researchers. Now we kill you." Then she started walking toward me, reloading her weapon. How did you escape? I didn't escape. She let me go. Lyra stared at him. She let you go? Just before she reached me, she stopped. Tilted her head like she was listening to something. Then she smiled with half a face and said, "Colonel Tekmar is dead. My mission is complete. You get to live so you can tell others what happens when you murder our people." Zekthar sat down heavily in his chair. Then she walked away. Left me alive in a bunker surrounded by the bodies of my soldiers. I stayed there for 6 hours before our rescue ships arrived. Did you ever find out what the humans had done to themselves? Months later, our intelligence services discovered fragments of information about something called the Berserker Protocol. Apparently, humans had developed a way to chemically and surgically modify their soldiers to remove all limitations. What kind of limitations? Pain receptors, fear responses, self-preservation instincts. Everything that normally prevents a soldier from fighting to the death. The humans could turn their people in. The final session took place 3 days later. Zekthar had requested time to prepare for what he called the hardest part of the story. When Lyra arrived at the medical facility, she found him sitting in the same chair, but something about him seemed different, more resolved perhaps, like a soldier who had finally decided to complete a difficult mission. "Commander," she said as she set up her recording equipment, "are you sure you're ready for this?" "I've been ready for a year," he replied. "But I needed to know that someone would listen, that someone would understand why we surrendered." The red light on the recording device blinked to life. Zekthar took a deep breath and began. The war should have ended after Firebase Omega. Any rational species would have seen what humans were capable of and found a way to negotiate peace. But the Galactic Alliance Council was not feeling rational. He paused, looking at his hands. The shaking had gotten worse over the past few days. The Council declared that the humans were a threat to all civilized life in the galaxy. They voted to authorize Operation Final Solution, the complete bombardment of Earth and all human colonies. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Genocide? Total extinction. Every human world, every human ship, every human life. The Council believed it was the only way to protect the galaxy from what they called the human disease. Zekthar stood up and moved to the window. The stars outside looked the same as always, but he knew that some of them no longer had human colonies orbiting them. I was given command of the 3rd Bombardment Fleet, 60 Dreadnought-class ships, each capable of sterilizing an entire planet. Our target was the outer colonies, smaller worlds that couldn't defend themselves. Did you carry out the bombardment? We destroyed 3 colonies completely, burned their atmospheres, melted their surfaces. 500,000 humans died in the first day. The commander's voice was completely flat now, emotionless, clinical. The 4th target was a colony called New Eden, agricultural world, mostly farmers and their families, about 200,000 people. No military installations, no strategic value, just civilians growing food. What happened at New Eden? We took our time with that one. 3 days of continuous bombardment. We wanted to make sure nothing survived. When we were finished, the planet's surface was molten glass. Zekthar turned away from the window. Then we intercepted the communications. What communications? Transmissions from the planet's surface. During the bombardment, humans were still broadcasting even as their world burned around them. The commander sat down heavily in his chair. Our intelligence teams decoded the transmissions. We expected to hear panic, desperation, pleas for mercy. Instead, we heard something that changed everything. What did you hear? Instructions, technical specifications, combat manuals. The humans on New Eden spent their final hours transmitting everything they had learned about fighting us to other human colonies. Zekthar's mandibles clicked slowly. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what else they were transmitting. What else? Recruitment messages. The dying humans were calling on their people to volunteer for military service, to join the war effort, to avenge their deaths. The commander's voice grew quieter, and they were responding. Every human colony, every human ship, every human settlement in the galaxy was sending back the same message. We volunteer. We're coming. Lyra stopped taking notes and stared at him. Commander, are you saying that bombing human colonies made them more likely to fight, not less? I'm saying that we had fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. We thought that if we killed enough of them, the survivors would surrender. Instead, every human we killed just made the rest of them angrier. Zekthar stood up again, unable to sit still. The communications from New Eden continued for 18 hours after the surface became uninhabitable. Somehow, humans in underground shelters were still broadcasting even as the planet died around them. What were they broadcasting? Technical data about our ships, our weapons, our tactics. They had been studying us during the bombardment, learning how our technology worked, how to fight us more effectively. The commander began pacing behind his chair. The final transmission came from a human child, maybe 10 years old. She was in a deep shelter with her family, and she knew they were all going to die. What did she say? She said, "We forgive you for what you're doing to us, but we will never forget, and we will never stop coming for you." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Lyra realized she was holding her breath. That transmission was sent to every human colony in the galaxy, a dying child forgiving her killers but promising vengeance. It became their rallying cry. Zekthar stopped pacing and looked directly at Lyra. Within a week, we discovered that our bombardment campaign had backfired completely. How? Every human civilian in the galaxy was volunteering for military service. Not just the young and healthy ones. Everyone, children, elderly, disabled, sick. They all wanted to fight. The commander's voice became very soft. Our intelligence services intercepted recruitment data from human colonies. They weren't screening volunteers for military fitness. They were accepting everyone who could hold a weapon. That sounds like desperation. That's what we thought too, until we learned what they were really doing. Zekthar returned to his chair but remained standing behind it. The humans weren't just recruiting soldiers. They were recruiting suicide bombers. Every civilian volunteer was being trained for kamikaze attacks. Against military targets. Against everything. Military bases, civilian stations, trade routes, diplomatic facilities. The humans had decided that if we were going to genocide them, they would take as much of the galaxy with them as possible. The commander's hands gripped the chair back tightly, but even that wasn't the most terrifying discovery. What was? The children. Human children were being trained from birth to hate us, to see killing Vorthak as their life's purpose. They weren't just recruiting child soldiers. They were creating a generation that existed only to destroy us. Zekthar's voice broke. Slightly, we intercepted video of human schools where 5-year-old children were learning to build explosives, where 7-year-olds practiced sneaking into buildings, where 10-year-olds studied Vorthak anatomy to learn where to stab for maximum damage. Commander, that's horrible. It was effective. Human children were infiltrating our supply lines, our support facilities, our civilian populations. They looked innocent, harmless. Then they would detonate themselves, taking dozens of our people with them. The commander moved to the window one more time. That's when High Command realized we had made a critical error in judgment. What error? We had assumed that humans valued their own lives, that if we killed enough of them, they would surrender to preserve what remained. But humans don't think like that. Zekthar turned back to face Lyra. Humans see their individual lives as less important than their species' survival. They will sacrifice themselves, their children, their entire civilization if necessary to ensure that their enemies don't survive either. So the Alliance decided to negotiate. The Alliance decided to run. We realized that we weren't fighting a war anymore. We were fighting an extinction event. Either we would kill every human in the galaxy, or they would kill every one of us. There was no middle ground. The commander sat down for the final time. The peace treaty wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. We agreed to withdraw from all human space, pay massive reparations, and accept permanent monitoring of our military forces. Why did the humans agree to peace if they were winning? Because they had gotten what they wanted. They had proven that they were too dangerous to attack, that any species that tried to genocide them would pay a price too high to imagine. Zekthar looked at his hands, still shaking after all this time. But the real reason we surrendered, the reason that High Command will never admit publicly, was discovered in the final intelligence report. What did you discover? We learned what humans do to their children during peacetime. Lyra frowned. What do you mean? Human children in peacetime are gentle, creative, curious. They play games, they learn about art and science, they dream of exploring the stars. They're innocent. The commander's voice became very quiet. But when humans go to war, they can transform their children into weapons within a single generation. Take innocent, loving children and turn them into killers who feel nothing but hate for their enemies. And that frightened you? It terrified us. Because it meant that humans weren't naturally violent. They choose violence when they need to. They can turn it on and off like a switch. Zekthar looked directly into the camera. A species that is naturally violent can be understood, predicted, negotiated with. But a species that can choose to become monsters, that can transform their own children into weapons when necessary, that's something else entirely. What is it? It's evolution perfected. Humans aren't just adapted to survive on a dangerous world. They're adapted to become whatever they need to become to ensure their species survives. The commander stood up one final time and removed his military insignia from his uniform. He placed them carefully on the table next to the recording device. Tell your audience this, reporter. Humans call themselves T,